those are the times, when Job said, I knew you as Lord, but now I know you as a friend. And it was a friend that walked with him through his suffering. And we would hear today that if we suffer, it's because of sin. It's because of something that we have done wrong. And so we are made to feel guilty, and then we're made to feel like, well, I don't need to tell anybody I'm really going through a hard time, because then they're going to think, I'm in a bad place, that I'm sinning, or that I'm out of the will of God because I'm suffering. And so we hide it. And I see this a lot, medically. People will have anxiety and panic attacks, and they would just describe them like, I will be fine, nothing will be going on, and then suddenly I just feel this overwhelming panic, and I feel like I'm going to die. And it's like no rhyme or reason. But when you get to digging and you're seeing, well, what kind of things have you been worried about? What kind of things have you been through? What kind of trauma have you endured? Then those things, start to come out. And people say, but I just suppress that. I don't let that come out. I don't cry. I don't want people to know that I'm not doing well, so I just hold it together and keep on moving forward. And that's what we have to do. But that kind of unrest and that kind of spiritual just sickness, it doesn't just dissipate and go away because you suppressed it for that moment. It goes deep down inside of you. And then there are times when you become vulnerable, less sleep, sickness, or something bad else happens in your life, and it's like your cup is already filled to the very top. And any one extra little bit, and it's just overflowing. So we're made to feel like those things are wrong and those things are sinful, and that we shouldn't suffer and that we shouldn't complain. But not that is God not on our side, but we should be on his side. And even when we are on his side, we will still suffer and we will still have problems. But the beauty is that he will walk with us through this suffering. And I too would want a miracle, like a helicopter to come over and to pull us out of this situation and to just make everything right. But God sometimes chooses to not pull us out suddenly, but to let us walk through that, but not through it alone, but with us, and walk with us through it. And those times when we get on the other side are so grateful for the closeness that we felt in those deep times. When nobody else could know how deeply we suffered, we felt the peace of God. And Shelby testified, last Sunday about her feeling the peace of God. And it was just hard for her to describe that. And I know it's hard for us to describe it, but I know that we've all experienced it, because it's like your world is crashing. Everything is going wrong. Nothing is going right. But you feel an inner peace of just a presence of something. And that feeling, it's like a small but a big feeling at the same time that overwhelms and lets you know that even if the worst happens in your mind, because your mind is thinking, what if this and what if that, even if the worst happens, because he is there, things are going to be okay. And that is the peace of God. Because it's not situational. It's not dependent on, well, if this happens, then this certainly will happen. If God could send his own son to suffer, and the worst thing ever that could happen in mankind happened, that God sent his son and we didn't recognize him and we crucified him. If he can make the worst thing to ever happen to humanity into the best thing, then he can help you in your situation where you're at. If he can turn the worst thing into the best thing in salvation for all humanity, then he can meet you in your problems. And your problems are not being inflicted upon you because you're sinful. It's because you live in this world like the rest of us. But the difference in a child of God suffering and someone who doesn't know the Lord, who doesn't walk with him, is that they walk alone. and they depend on their situation to get better to find happiness. And we don't have to do that. That even if our situation crumbles, we are still not alone. And that there is eternity beyond our day-to-day problems where God will ultimately make it right. And that is a promise that we have. So who we say God is, it matters. This is what we've been talking about. We've been talking about the organization of the Trinity. What is the Trinity? Why does it even matter? Why does it even matter? Who do we say God is? It matters. So idolatry, twisting God's character into an image that suits human desires. I want us to think about idolatry like that and to try and retrain our minds from going into these figures that we have into twisting God's character into an image that suits human desires. And when we think about that definition, we can easily see how people use, money and power and fame and likes on social media. That is their idol. That is who they are crediting. That is who they are worshiping. And that is something bigger than them that they are looking to attain to give themselves meaning. But there is emptiness in that. The devil has a counterfeit for all the things that God can offer. This recognition, and power and money and fame. These are all ploys that we, and in general, the world would seek to attain, that is meant to fulfill in themselves to make them feel more important, better, or bigger than someone else, which is really pride. So in the Bible, idolatry means revering, serving, or placing ultimate trust in anything other than the one true God. It includes worshiping physical statues or false deities, as well as letting modern God substitutes like money, power, or success dictate your hope, identity, and security. We shouldn't place our hope in those things because those things will ultimately fail. And there is greater meaning and greater purpose that we have rather than searching those things. And I think that we all realize that, but sometimes we get caught up in other issues, in family issues and in health issues, and it's not that those things don't matter. But there is just something bigger. It reminds me too, I'm bringing Daryl into a lot of stories. This is a good one, Daryl. It won't speak negatively of you. But Daryl tells a story about John when he was diagnosed with diabetes. And, John, unfortunately, has been a very brittle diabetic. He will have high highs, and then he will have low lows. And thankfully, God has really looked over him in the past few years since his truck wreck. And while he still has some issues, they are not to the extent that they were when he was younger. But his lows, I know that, you all may be on insulin or may be diabetic or may know someone who has diabetes, and when someone's blood sugar gets low, they would maybe feel shaky or sweaty and kind of need to eat something pretty quick. Well, John was, he got uncontrollable, which some people can be like that, and he would stay low for a long time and would just be battling to bring them up, and just had some horrible incidences. And so Daryl tells a story about him praying beside, I'm saying Mary's Chapel, but that's not where it is, Hamilton Chapel in Pound. And he says, I can show you the guardrail that I was passing and praying. Won't you share that testimony, Daryl?
And to this day, I remind
Yes. When God speaks to you, you know when he speaks to you. I don't know, for you all, I have a lot of voices in my head tell me I need to do this, I got to do this, and then I think, I shouldn't have thought that, why did I think that? But when the voice of the Lord speaks to you, it is a different voice. And the Bible says, my sheep know my voice. And when he speaks to you, you know that it is something outside of yourself, but also within yourself that is speaking to your spirit. And that message there that he gave Daryl, count it as nothing. It's not that God doesn't think that your problems are important to him. In the long run, is your particular problem right now important? Or 5 years from now, are you going to be dealing with the same problem? Maybe not. But God credits those, and it's not that he doesn't think that they are finicky or of no importance, but he says to count it as nothing, not because it is nothing, but because we shouldn't give that much credit to our problems, that we should look to the hand of God, to his ever-presence in our life, that even if we focus on that, and even if we worry about that, for John's diabetes, even if we fretted every single day and just wondered, what could happen in this day, how is that going to help the situation? And we know that. And we tell ourselves not to worry, but our focus is on the wrong thing. Our focus is on things turning out the way that we think they should turn out. And our mindset should be of the game of trust that kids would play, where you stand up and where you fall back and you just trust that you're going to be caught. But how much more so for the hand of God to be the one that you fall back on, that even if you fall and even if you fail, that his hand will still be there. And thank God for that. Thank God for that able hand. So this is what we've been talking about here, the Old Testament focus on idol worship. I'd like two people, if they would, to volunteer to read. I've got 2 verses here. If you wouldn't mind to read one of these verses, would you slip up your hand so we could, Brooke, if you'll look for Colossians 3:5, and Olympia, if you will look for Philippians 3:19. So, idol worship, bowing down to carved wooden images, statues, or celestial bodies, is strictly forbidden in the 10 Commandments. This was spoken by God when he appeared to the people on Mount Sinai, and they heard an audible voice delivering out these 10 Commandments. And the first 2 commandments are based on not making a graven image for yourself and not worshiping anything but the Lord God. So, And these, it's an act of spiritual unfaithfulness when you do this, because you say that God is something that you can reduce to yourself, and that there are other things that are more worthy of worship other than Yahweh God. So these are the first 2 of the commandments that God delivers to his people in setting his position and authority. But the New Testament focus, it brings it away from these exact idols like we have in our head, like I said. It broadens the definition to include internal attachments. So an idol is not necessarily something external, but is something internal as well. The Apostle Paul and Jesus teach that anything we value or depend on more than God, such as greed or earthly appetites, is an idol. And I would like to not necessarily expound on this idea as if it is something different, but to say that we can create images of God that we think God should be. And those images of God and how we think he should act, that is a form of idolatry. And we have all been guilty of that at some point, saved and unsaved, of trying to restrict God and to make him into, surely God wouldn't do this. Surely God should do this. And when we are reducing him down and getting him fit in a box, like Charlie said, then this is a form of idolatry. So Colossians 3:5, if you'll go ahead and read that, please. So they mention greed being idolatry. And when we're reading our Old Testament and when we look through there, it would be hard for us to insert greed as being an idol there. But the New Testament is broadening our idea that not only can we worship, concrete, materialistic images, but there are things within ourselves that we can worship and that we can put to a higher status than what is deserved. And so read those that you listed out, not only the greed, but the list of the ones that was considered idolatry.
Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed.
And those are all things within us that we would look to fulfill. It's that they describe it as a God-shaped hole in your heart. There is something lacking within us when we are born, and we realize this before we meet the Lord, and we are looking to fill that. So we look to fill that with things that make us happy, the things that satisfy us. And each one of us have our own testimonies of where following those particular things led us. What happened when you gave full, unrestriction to yourself to bring about happiness to yourself and your body? It was utter destruction. If we continued on that road, and while we were on that road, there were fulfilling things that excited us and made us happy, but they were not lasting, and in the end, they brought destruction to our bodies and to people around us. So, Olympia, if you'll go ahead and read Philippians 3:19.
Whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who mind earthly things. Just that one.
Yes, that's talking about God, and they describe here as a God of your belly. Your belly is something that can stretch and can grow bigger the more that you put in it. Not only the outside, but the inside. If you were to go on a fast for 7 days, your stomach would actually shrink. And so if you were to try and eat the same amount later on, the week after as you could the week prior, you would have great difficulty to do that. It may make you nauseous and vomit because your stomach can grow and it can shrink. And the more that you put in it, the more it expands. And then there's hormones inside of it too that make you want to eat. To where if you're like, I want to cut back, I'm not going to eat that much. Well, your body is not for that. It's going to secrete hormones that say, you need to eat something sweet right now. So your body is against you. Your stomach is against you in that regard. And so these people, their God is their stomach. They're ever being filled and never being satisfied. And we see that today where people look for satisfaction in all things. And this is, as I said, that God-shaped hole where we're looking, there's just something that they know that is attainable, that is bigger than themselves, that they are looking to fulfill. So who do we say he is? It's important for us to know not only who does God say that he is, but also what do we say he is? Who do we say he is? So we think of substituting wooden idols for modern idols, power, money, and fame. But there is another way we create an idol, and this is what we've been talking about. We characterize God based on our desires, thoughts, and how we imagine, and that is our God. And that is a false God, and that is an idol. So it is very important that we know who he is. And as I said, the way that we are revealed who he truly is through the living word, through the Bible that he has given us, and through prayer. And he will reveal himself to us. So we can make God into an idol by mischaracterizing him. And this is the rest of where I want to go through. I'm not sure if we'll have complete time to do everything today. But an example of this in the Old Testament of them mischaracterizing God is in the worship of the golden calf. And then want to look at what happens to idols in God's presence. And then what we had brought up last week of talking about false prophets. And I said, who sends false prophets? And what do we know now? Who sends false prophets? The Lord. The Lord sends false prophets to test us to see if we would seek the truth. This is not a ploy by Satan. I'm sure Satan could use that, but the Bible explicitly says here in Deuteronomy 13:3, I wrote it down this time, that it is the Lord who will send false prophets. And I want you all to think about that and think about the ministers that you're choosing to listen to. You know, are they biblically based, or are they just really encouraging? And I'll be honest with you. I was going through a time a few years ago, and it's like I needed encouragement. I did, and we all do. I mean, we go through those times where we get down. It's like I just need somebody to say a positive word. And I think, you know, Daryl always does that, and he did it this morning in getting these prayer requests and all these problems that are going on. But he said, you know, he will always preface it and say, but God is able, and God is always with us. And I think that's so good to have that encouragement. So I was going through, I was like, I just need to hear encouragement right now. So I turned to Joel Osteen, because he is always an encouraging person. And I turned to him on the radio and was listening to him, and it was very much his same message of, you know, God is leading you to a breakthrough. But the things that he was mentioning, you know, that promotion that you want at work, and you know, the home that you're in isn't good enough. Like, you know, God is getting ready to move you up. And I just couldn't go with that encouragement because it just felt so superficial to me that, you know, God, if I'm going to depend on my relationship with you, is if you will do this very thing that I'm asking for you right now. You know, if you truly love me, God, then you will do this specific thing for me. And I just felt like, you know, this is not encouraging at all. It's baseless. It's baseless. And we shouldn't box God into a genie that just solves all of our problems when we have them. God calls us to walk in our problems with him, and that is the test of faith. This is the seed that falls on these different grounds. Are we going to be a seed that springs up for a little bit, and when the sun comes out, it just cooks us down? You know, and we've seen, unfortunately, people like that who hear the word and who are happy to hear the word, and the seed is planted and it blossoms, and we see, you know, the joy of the Lord. But when strife or when resistance comes, they are just burned away. And I'm so encouraged. I guess I'm a weird person. I'm not encouraged by these false things. I'm encouraged by thinking of that seed that was burned. And I think, I do not want to be that seed. I don't want to be so superficial and just worship God, you know, when times are good. And God help me, you know, God help me in rough times that I would not leave you. You know, help me to be strong. That strength is not in ourselves. It's the Holy Spirit that he sent that enables us to have the strength to hold on, or else we would just fall away. If it was truly just in ourselves, if it was left up to ourselves, we would not have the strength. But the Holy Spirit sustains us through those things. So the golden calf, a false representation of God. What had happened, you know, Moses had led the people out. They had seen the sea parted. They had walked on dry ground. And then God appeared to them on Mount Sinai. You know, you talk about God, show me you're real, prove to me you're real, and I'll believe you. Well, he did. And he appeared to them in fire and smoke and in lightning, and the people were terrified, and they heard his voice and issued to him the commandments that they would have them to follow to worship him. And they agreed. They agreed, and then they sealed it in a blood covenant where there was blood sprinkled, and they walked through it. So they heard God's voice. They agreed to his commandments to follow him because he had just rescued them out of slavery for hundreds and hundreds of years and just shown himself in a mighty way. So of course, they would, you know, be in agreement to follow him. But what happened was, you know, God had invited the people up to the mountain But they were all afraid to go after this happened. They made this agreement, but they were afraid to get closer. But Moses agreed, and Moses ascended the mountain. And while he's up there, God is giving him instructions on how to build the tabernacle, how he wants the people to worship. And he's giving them these informational things to Moses as the messenger to go and tell the people. So meanwhile, the people who refuse to walk up the mountain, they stay at the bottom of the mountain. And as people do, they get bored. Like Daryl may have gotten bored waiting in lines at Disney World, just standing there waiting in lines.
Yes, I did.
You're just standing and you're waiting and nothing is really happening. So that what they did was they asked Aaron to make an image, to make a golden calf, an image that they could worship. And this seems so crazy because you think, gosh, if I were these people and God delivered me and parted the waters and, Pharaoh and the army are drowning in the sea behind me and then God appears to me on a mountain, how could I immediately just worship and ask to worship a golden calf? But the Israelites created the golden calf not in place of God. And I think that's where we get it wrong and where I've got it wrong too, where we think, well, let's not worship God who has revealed himself. Let's worship this instead. But the people were creating this to worship Yahweh God through this golden calf. So it was a way for them to materialize what had happened to them in a way that they could see it and worship it. So it wasn't necessarily a replacement, like we're just going to call it, we're just going to attribute all the things that God did to this and say that this image was what brought us out. But through the image, in something that they could see and worship and touch, they were going to worship Yahweh God. So then they said, after Aaron had created this golden calf, Israel, this is your God who brought you up from the land of Egypt. And we would think, oh, well, it's like a replacement, like they're just exchanging it out and attributing all these things to this golden calf. That's not necessarily true. They are wanting this calf in order to visualize the God that rescued them. And this is what I've been talking about mischaracterizing God, about trying to reduce him down into something that we can see and touch and feel. And in doing this, they immediately broke the first two commandments that they agreed to with God. No other gods beside me, and do not make an idol for yourself. Immediately, just as soon as they were delivered, broke the first two. And I think that we separate ourselves out from that and think, like I said, how could we do that? But we very much do that. God, in trying to conceptualize God in a way that makes sense in our human minds. And God is immediately warning us not to do that, to worship no other gods before him, and do not make an idol for yourself. And what we've been talking about today is this idol is not just this golden calf image. Nobody is going to have that in their home and worship that today. It's just not going to happen. But what we do is that we say that God is something that he is not, based on what we think he should be and do, and we create a false image of what God should be, and that is how we are idolaters in modern times. We are now creating a God based on what he should think, do, and believe, and we see churches compromising, these traditional and orthodox understandings and readings of what the Bible clearly says in order to accommodate, because they can't reconcile what God says he is and who he is with who they think he should be. And they're worshiping a false idol. That is not the true God. That is not the true God. And could we fully characterize God? Could we explain out to you, everything that he is. I mean, yes and no. God is love, and his truth is revealed to us of who he is here in the Bible. So I want to get to a few of those before we run out of time here. So God cannot be reduced to your own understanding. And Isaiah is describing this, and he is writing here in chapter 40. It's like a satire of the people who are creating actual, wooden idols, structural things in which to worship. And he's describing the blacksmith that has to toil over the fire and create these images that can't stand up on their own, that are made from earthly things that are corruptible. And he is kind of making fun of, you all choose to worship this and not the true God who can't be reduced to this. And he asked, to whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness will you compare to him? So if you were going to make God into an idol, what would you form him to appear as? And in the New Testament, it reinforces this incorporeal nature, which is a nature that God, we know Jesus is God and had a bodily form, but God himself, in John chapter 4, verses 24, Jesus states that God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship him in spirit, and what we've been talking about this morning is truth. So the question is then who is the true God? How would God characterize himself? And there are many places throughout the Bible where God reveals himself. One would be to Moses when he said, you can't look at me, you can't see my face and live, but you can see, the back as I pass. And it is a beautiful revelation of who God is as he passes by. But I wanted to expound here in Isaiah chapter 40. And this is how Isaiah describes him here. And I want us to think about, how we think about God now, how we reduce him down to our understanding. And I'm not saying necessarily us personally, but just collectively. People who don't know God, how they think of God. And this is what Isaiah says here. See, the Lord comes with strength, and his power establishes his rule. His wages are with him, and his reward accompanies him. He protects his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them in the fold of his garment. He gently leads those that are nursing. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or marked off the heavens with the span of his hand? Who has gathered the dust of the earth in a measure, or weighed the mountains on a balance and the hills on the scales? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, who gave him counsel? Who did he consult? Who gave him understanding and taught him the paths of justice? Who taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? Look, the nations are like a drop in a bucket. They are considered as a speck of dust on the scales. He lifts up the islands like fine dust. So when we think of God and we just reduce him down to what we have experienced, and we fail to recognize sometimes his personal relationship with God, how big he is, how I can't even think of a word, extraordinary, but also in this description here, they described his power, but they did not fail here. This verse here, he protects his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them in the fold of his garment. He gently leads those that are nursing. There is a tenderness and a loving ownership that God has to his sheep in spite of this horrifying power that he has in his size and his abilities. And we are those sheep. We are those sheep in the folds of his garment. And let us not try and mischaracterize. Let us not try and reduce God down into what we think he should do, because it says, who did he consult? Who gave him understanding and taught him the paths of justice? Nobody. We didn't teach God anything. We didn't let him know about anything. He established justice. He established our understanding, but his understanding we will never know. So when we think about idol worship, let's not reduce it down to an Old Testament problem. It's very much a New Testament and a current day problem of us trying to reconstruct God based on what we think he should be, not based on who he says. So it is important for us to know who he says he is. But more important is, it's important for us to understand who he says he is. Because there is an understanding above us, and it is revealed to us. So I hope you all like this little offshoot that we did here about idolatry. Next week, I want to get into kind of a summary, like I said, of where we have been since Easter, in talking about our hope not necessarily being just for heaven. A lot of people think that, once I get to heaven, then, it's all over with. But heaven is a waiting place for God to establish his kingdom on earth. It's what he was trying to do with Eden, was to create people who would want to serve him in a perfect, peaceful, fully complete, non-competitive existence where they could walk with him. And man failed. Both Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, and that failed. But he has allowed for people to continue on in hopes that his true children who recognize him and will seek the truth will find him. And our hope is not just for heaven, but what he's going to bring back to earth and making perfection on earth for us to be with him. And I think it's so beautiful that there wouldn't be a new temple constructed because Jesus, Jesus, the Father, the Holy Spirit are going to be in this new place. And there is no need for us to go and sacrifice or for us to seek him in a temple, because his glory is going to fill the temple and we are going to be there. Amen. Thank you.